Imagine finding out the person you trusted betrayed you. I still remember staring at that hotel receipt, my hands trembling as the reality sank in. One room, two guests, one queen bed, and a pull-out couch. My name is Sarah. I'm 22 years old, and I am the youngest senior marketing strategist at Morrison & Associates in Chicago. Until 3 days ago, I thought I was planning my October wedding to the love of my life. Now I know better. Before we go any further, welcome back to Revenge Stories with Kyle. And if this is your first time watching any of our videos, we encourage you to hit that subscribe button. Your support means the world to us, and it motivates us to continue creating even more powerful stories for you. So stick with us to the very end. And if this story moves you, drop your comments and share with a friend. Now, let's dive back in. I had everything figured out: a thriving career, a beautiful apartment, and what I thought was the perfect relationship with my college sweetheart, Jake Martinez. Jake and I met at Northwestern when we were both 18. He was studying computer science, I was double majoring in marketing and psychology. What drew me to him wasn't just his intelligence, though watching him code was genuinely attractive. It was his integrity. Jake was the guy who'd return a wallet he found on the street, who'd stay up all night helping struggling classmates with their programming assignments, who remembered every small detail about what mattered to me. We were that couple everyone envied. Study dates that turned into deep conversations about our futures, weekend road trips to explore small towns around Illinois, inside jokes that made us laugh until our stomachs hurt. When other relationships in our friend group imploded under the stress of college life, we only grew stronger. After graduation, Jake landed a developer position at Maplewood Solutions, a rapidly growing startup in downtown Chicago. I'd already been recruited by Morrison & Associates during my senior year. They'd seen my capstone project on consumer psychology and offered me a position that most people don't get until they're 30. We were both crushing our careers, supporting each other's ambitions, building something real together. The proposal came on New Year's Eve, exactly 4 years after our first kiss at a college party. Nothing elaborate, just the two of us on the roof of our apartment building, the Chicago skyline glittering around us, snow falling like confetti. When Jake dropped to one knee with my grandmother's ring that he'd somehow convinced my mother to give him, I knew I was the luckiest woman alive. "Sarah," he'd said, his voice shaking slightly, "you're not just my girlfriend. You're my partner, my best friend, my future. Will you marry me?" Of course I said yes. How could I not? We'd already been planning our life together for years. The October wedding we'd dreamed about since junior year of college, the house we'd buy in Lincoln Park, the kids we'd have once we were both established in our careers. Everything was falling perfectly into place. Which is why I had absolutely no concerns when Jake told me about his work conference in Minneapolis. It was a big opportunity. Maplewood was presenting their new software platform to potential investors, and Jake had been chosen as one of 3 developers to represent the company. "I'm so proud of you," I told him the night before he left, helping him pack his presentation materials. "This could be huge for your career." "I know," he grinned, folding his lucky interview shirt, the blue one I'd bought him for his first job interview. "And when I get back, we need to finalize the catering menu for the wedding. My mom's been asking about vegetarian options." I laughed, kissing his cheek. "Your mom asks about vegetarian options every time we talk. I think she's forgotten we already handled that." "She's just excited," Jake said, pulling me into his arms. "We all are. 5 more months and you'll be Mrs. Martinez." The confidence in his voice, the way he said it like it was the most natural thing in the world, there wasn't a shadow of doubt in my mind about our future. Jake's company had hired a new senior developer a few months earlier, Fiona Walsh. I'd met her briefly at Maplewood Spring Mixer. She was 28, striking in an effortless way that I genuinely admired, and clearly brilliant at what she did. She was also married, which honestly made me like her more. There's something refreshing about meeting an attractive woman in your boyfriend's workplace who's clearly off-limits and uninterested in workplace drama. When Jake mentioned that Fiona would be joining him and their project manager Dave for the Minneapolis presentation, I was actually pleased. Having a senior developer on the team would make their presentation stronger, and Jake had mentioned several times how much he was learning from working with her. "She's incredible at debugging," he told me over dinner a few weeks before the trip. "I've learned more about efficient coding in 2 months working with her than I did in my first year at the company." I loved seeing Jake excited about his work, loved hearing him talk about growing as a developer. Success looked good on him. The morning he left for Minneapolis, I made his favorite breakfast, blueberry pancakes with real maple syrup, and packed him trail mix for the flight. He was practically vibrating with nervous energy, checking his presentation slides one more time on his laptop. "You're going to be amazing," I assured him, straightening his tie. "They'd be crazy not to invest after seeing what you've built." "I hope so," he said, kissing his goodbye. "I'll call you tonight after the presentation." And he did call. Thursday evening, his voice full of excitement as he told me how well everything had gone. The investors were impressed. There were talks about expanding the development team, possibly even opening a West Coast office. "That's incredible, baby," I said, genuinely thrilled for him. "I'm so proud of you." "I couldn't have done it without your support," he said softly. "I love you, Sarah. I'll see you tomorrow night." Friday afternoon, I decided to surprise him by picking him up from the airport instead of letting him take a taxi home. I wanted to celebrate his success, to hear all the details about the presentation and the investors' reactions. Maybe we'd go to that Italian place we loved, toast his achievement with good wine. I positioned myself where I could see the passengers coming through security, holding a small welcome home sign I'd made at work during my lunch break. Cheesy, maybe, but Jake loved gestures like that. When I saw him walking through the terminal with Fiona and Dave, my first thought was how professional they all looked, like a team that had just conquered something important together. Jake spotted me immediately, and his face lit up with genuine surprise and joy. "Sarah!" He dropped his bag and wrapped me in the kind of hug that made me remember exactly why I fell in love with him. "What are you doing here?" "Surprising my successful fiancé," I said, grinning up at him. "How does it feel to be Maplewood's star presenter?" Dave laughed, overhearing. "He killed it, Sarah. I've never seen investors that excited about a software demo." Fiona approached us, and I noticed she looked slightly uncomfortable, not in a suspicious way, just tired. Conference networking could be exhausting. "Sarah, right?" she said, extending her hand. "Great to see you again. Jake talks about you constantly." "Only good things, I hope," I replied, shaking her hand warmly. "Always," she said, but something in her smile seemed strange. Travel fatigue, I assumed. As we walked toward the parking garage, Fiona stretched dramatically and laughed. "God, I'm so sore. 2 days of sitting in conference chairs and walking around in heels. Thank goodness for Jake's magic hands." I froze, my keys halfway to the car door. Magic hands? Jake's cheeks flushed slightly, and for the first time since I'd seen him at the airport, he looked uncomfortable. "Fiona had a headache last night after all the networking events. You know how I am with tension headaches. I helped out." "Helped out how?" I asked, though I was beginning to understand what she meant. "Massage," Fiona said casually, as if it was the most normal thing in the world. I was in agony, and Jake totally saved me. "You're so lucky, Sarah. He's got the most amazing touch." The way she said it, the emphasis on amazing touch, the slightly too intimate smile, made my stomach drop. But it was Jake's reaction that really alarmed me. He wasn't laughing it off or explaining it away. He was looking at the ground, avoiding my eyes entirely. "Well," I managed, forcing a smile, "that's nice of you to help a colleague." The drive home was tense. Dave had gotten a ride with someone else, so it was just the three of us in my car, with Fiona in the backseat making casual conversation about the conference, while I tried to process what I'd just heard. Jake gave short responses, staring out the window, clearly eager for the conversation to end. When we dropped Fiona off at her apartment building, she leaned forward to squeeze Jake's shoulder. "Thanks again for everything this weekend. You're the best." The casual intimacy of the gesture, the way her hand lingered on his shoulder, the familiarity in her voice sent alarm bells ringing in my head, but I pushed them down. Jake was tired, Fiona was being friendly, and I was probably reading too much into innocent interactions between colleagues. Back at our apartment, Jake went straight to the bedroom, claiming exhaustion. "I just need to crash," he said, already loosening his tie. "We can talk about everything tomorrow, okay?" I nodded, but sleep was the last thing on my mind. Something about the airport interaction kept nagging at me. Not just Fiona's comments about the massage, but Jake's obvious discomfort, the way he'd avoided my eyes. I tried to distract myself by unpacking his suitcase, a routine task that usually helped calm my mind. Conference materials, dirty clothes, his toiletry bag, everything normal. Until I reached the bottom of the bag and found a crumpled hotel receipt. The Marriott Minneapolis downtown. 2 guests, 1 room. I stared at the paper, reading the details over and over. 1 king bed and a pull-out sofa. Check-in Thursday, check-out Friday. Room registered under Jake Martinez, but clearly indicating 2 occupants. They'd shared a room. My hands started shaking. This wasn't just a colleague helping another colleague with a headache. This was my fiancé spending the night in the same room as another woman. An attractive, older woman who'd just been talking about his amazing touch, and not mentioning it to me. I sat on our bed, the receipt still in my trembling hands, trying to find an innocent explanation. Maybe the hotel had made a mistake with their reservations. Maybe the company had booked shared rooms to save money. Maybe. But even as I tried to rationalize it, I knew I was grasping at straws. Jake had been acting strange since I picked him up. The discomfort, the avoidance, the way he'd rushed to bed instead of celebrating his successful presentation with me, it all suddenly made sense. That's when I noticed his phone on the nightstand, charging silently next to our bed. Jake never left his phone out of reach. Ever. He was always checking messages, responding to work emails, scrolling through news. For him to leave it behind meant he was either completely exhausted or he didn't want it near him while I was awake. I looked at Jake, sleeping peacefully beside me, and made a decision that would change my life forever. I needed to know the truth. His phone had always been protected by a passcode, but a few months ago he'd set up fingerprint unlock for convenience. "So much easier," he'd said, demonstrating how quickly he could access his messages. Moving carefully, I lifted his hand and pressed his thumb to the sensor. The phone unlocked immediately. What I found wasn't just evidence of an affair. It was a complete demolition of everything I thought I knew about the man I was planning to marry. Months of text messages with Fiona, going back to March, just 2 weeks after she'd started at Maplewood. Messages that began professional and quickly became intimate. Photos I'd never seen. Plans I'd never heard about. And worse, conversations about me. "Sarah's getting clingy about wedding planning," Jake had written just last week. "She keeps showing me centerpiece options like I care about table decorations." "Poor baby," Fiona had replied. "Maybe it's time to be honest about what you really want." "I know, I just need to figure out the timing. The wedding's in October, but I can't keep pretending much longer." They weren't just having an affair. They were planning a future together while I planned my wedding. I scrolled back further, finding the conversation from the night before his trip to Minneapolis. Can't wait to finally wake up next to you, Fiona had written. It's going to be perfect, Jake had replied. And Sarah actually helped me pack. The irony is killing me. The massage Fiona had mentioned so casually at the airport, that was the least intimate thing they'd done in Minneapolis. The hotel receipt told the real story. They'd booked the shared room deliberately, had planned this as their first romantic getaway together. But the detail that broke something fundamental inside me was a message from 3 days ago. What if Sarah finds out? Fiona had asked. She won't, Jake had replied. She trusts me completely. Sometimes I think she's too naive for her own good. Too naive. The man I'd loved for 4 years, supported through career struggles, helped build a future with, thought I was too naive to notice his betrayal. I read every message, studied every photo, absorbed every cruel comment about my supposed cluelessness. By the time I was done, the sun was rising, and I felt like a completely different person than I'd been the night before. But strangely, I wasn't devastated. I was clear. For the first time in hours, I looked at Jake objectively. This wasn't the man I'd fallen in love with in college. That person had possessed integrity, honesty, loyalty. This person is a stranger wearing Jake's face, lying in the bed we'd shared for 2 years while planning his escape with another woman. I sat his phone back on the nightstand and walked to our kitchen, made coffee with steady hands, sat at our table and began to plan. Jake thought I was naive. He thought I trusted him completely because I was too simple to see what was happening right in front of me. He had no idea what he'd just handed me, not just evidence of his betrayal, but a complete roadmap of his vulnerabilities. By the time Jake woke up at 10 a.m., I was dressed for work, sitting at our kitchen table with my laptop open, looking like I'd been up for hours handling business. "Morning," he said, kissing the top of my head in a gesture that now felt like a performance. "Morning," I said, not looking up from my screen. "Morrison's got a new client presentation Monday, so I wanted to get ahead of the research." He poured himself coffee, and I noticed his phone was already in his hand. Checking for messages from Fiona, no doubt. "How's your head feeling?" I asked. "You seemed exhausted last night." "Much better," he said, scrolling through his phone. "Just needed to crash after all that travel." I nodded sympathetically. "Well, take your time recovering. I'm actually going to be pretty busy this weekend anyway. Maya's having some crisis with her roommate situation, so I told her I'd help her apartment hunt." Relief flickered across Jake's face. "That's nice of you. I might just hang around here, catch up on some personal projects." Personal projects, right. Like texting his girlfriend about their romantic weekend. "Sounds perfect," I said, closing my laptop and standing up. "I'll probably be out most of the day. Maybe we can do dinner tomorrow night? That new sushi place you wanted to try." "Yeah," Jake said, already typing on his phone. "That sounds great." I kissed his cheek, a gesture as performative as his had been, and left him alone in our apartment to dig his own grave deeper. But I wasn't going apartment hunting with Maya. I was going to work, where I had access to resources that Jake couldn't even imagine. Morrison & Associates wasn't just a marketing firm. We were strategic consultants who specialized in crisis management and competitive intelligence. Our client list included Fortune 500 companies, political campaigns, and high-profile individuals who needed problems solved quietly and thoroughly. And I was very, very good at my job. I spent Saturday morning in our office's research department, using databases that most people don't know exist. Within 3 hours, I had a complete dossier on Fiona, not just her professional background, but her financial situation, her marriage history, her social media presence, everything. What I found was fascinating. Fiona wasn't just cheating with Jake. She had a pattern. 3 previous affairs during her 5-year marriage, all with younger men in subordinate positions at her various jobs. Her husband, a successful orthodontist, had no idea about any of them. More importantly, Fiona's current marriage was the foundation of her entire lifestyle. Dr. Michael Walsh paid for her luxury apartment, her designer clothes, her lease on the BMW she drove. Without his financial support, she'd be living paycheck to paycheck on her developer salary. Jake thought he was having a sophisticated affair with an accomplished older woman. In reality, he was the latest in a series of disposable toys for someone who had no intention of leaving her comfortable marriage. But the truly valuable information came from Maplewood. Their upcoming funding round wasn't just important for Jake's career, it was make or break for the entire company. The Minneapolis presentation had gone well, but the investors were still evaluating multiple software companies for their next major investment. And investor decisions, I knew from experience, could be influenced by many factors, including concerns about internal company culture and employee conduct. By Saturday evening, I had everything I needed. Sunday would be for implementation. I returned home to find Jake relaxed and happy, clearly having spent the day texting with Fiona about their successful weekend together. He suggested we order Thai food and watch a movie, the kind of cozy domestic evening we'd enjoyed hundreds of times before. "How was apartment hunting?" he asked as we settled on the couch with our pad thai. "Productive," I said truthfully. "Maya's got some interesting options." We watched an action movie, Jake's arm around me, both of us pretending this was a normal Saturday night for a couple 5 months away from their wedding. The performance was almost impressive in its completeness. Monday morning, I woke up early and dressed carefully. My best suit, the one I wore for high-stakes client presentations. Jake was still sleeping when I left for work, which was perfect. My first call was to Jessica Chen, an investigative journalist at the Chicago Tribune who'd helped us with research on previous client projects. Jessica specialized in business ethics and had been looking for a story about workplace misconduct in the tech industry. "I might have something for you," I told her over coffee at 8 a.m., "but it needs to be handled delicately. There are some timing considerations." By 10 a.m., Jessica had copies of Jake and Fiona's text messages, the ones that clearly showed they'd used a company business trip for their affair, used company resources to facilitate their relationship, and created a potential liability for Maplewood. My second call was to Michael Walsh, Fiona's husband. I used my work number and identified myself as a marketing consultant conducting research on industry professionals. "Dr. Walsh," I said in my most professional voice, "I'm calling about your wife's professional background for a potential collaboration. Is Mrs. Walsh currently available for travel assignments? I ask because we've heard she's particularly effective at building close working relationships with team members." The carefully chosen words did exactly what I intended. Dr. Walsh began asking questions that would lead him to pay closer attention to his wife's business trips and work relationships. My third call was to the Minnesota investors who were considering funding Maplewood. As a representative of Morrison & Associates, I had legitimate reason to contact them about potential marketing consultation services. During our conversation, I casually mentioned concerns about internal company culture and professional conduct standards that sophisticated investors always wanted to evaluate before committing funds. "You'll want to do thorough due diligence on their management practices," I suggested. "Employee conduct during business travel, internal relationship policies, that sort of thing. In our experience, companies with poor internal boundaries often struggle with client boundary management as well." By noon, I'd planted seeds that would grow into exactly the kind of scrutiny that Jake and Fiona couldn't afford. But the masterstroke came that afternoon when I called Maplewood's HR department. "This is Sarah Chen from Morrison & Associates," I said to the HR director. "We're conducting a routine background check on Jake Martinez and Fiona Walsh for a potential client project. Could you confirm their employment status and whether there are any internal conduct issues we should be aware of?" The beauty of this approach was its complete legitimacy. Morrison & Associates regularly conducted background checks for clients, and Maplewood's HR department was obligated to provide factual employment information. What they couldn't provide was equally telling. When the HR director hesitated before answering questions about recent business travel conduct, I knew my intelligence had been accurate. "I'll need to call you back," she said finally. "There may be some matters that require review before we can provide a complete reference." Perfect! An HR investigation would begin immediately. That evening, Jake came home excited about a follow-up meeting with the Minnesota investors, scheduled for Friday. "This could be huge," he said, loosening his tie. "They want to see a more detailed demo of our platform." "That's wonderful," I said, kissing his cheek. "You must be so proud of the impression you made last weekend." "We all did great," he said, and I noticed he didn't mention Fiona specifically. "Interesting. How's Fiona feeling about the follow-up meeting?" I asked casually. Jake's expression flickered, just for a moment, but I caught it. "She's dealing with some personal stuff right now, might not be able to attend." I tilted my head sympathetically. "Oh no, nothing serious, I hope?" "I'm not sure," Jake said, already reaching for his phone. I watched him text Fiona, watched him wait for a response that didn't come immediately. For the first time since I'd discovered his betrayal, I saw anxiety cross his features. By Wednesday, Jake was genuinely worried. Fiona hadn't been at work Monday or Tuesday, and she wasn't responding to his messages. The Friday investor meeting was approaching, and Jake was starting to panic about having to handle the presentation alone. "Maybe she's just sick," I suggested when he mentioned his concerns over dinner. "Maybe," Jake said, but he didn't sound convinced. I knew exactly what was happening to Fiona because I'd orchestrated every detail. Her husband had confronted her about her business travel activities. Maplewood's HR department had launched an investigation into employee conduct during company trips. The Minnesota investors had requested additional information about Maplewood's internal management practices before proceeding with funding discussions. Fiona Walsh was fighting fires on multiple fronts, and she was losing. Thursday evening, Jake came home looking defeated. "The investors postponed the meeting," he said, slumping into our kitchen chair. "Something about wanting to complete their due diligence process first." "That's probably normal," I said, rubbing his shoulders sympathetically. "Big investments require thorough evaluation." "I guess," he said. "It's just, with Fiona out and the timing being so critical." "Where is Fiona?" I asked. "Have you heard anything?" Jake's jaw tightened. "She's taking some personal time. Family emergency, apparently." Family emergency. I almost smiled. That was one way to describe your marriage imploding while your employer investigates your professional conduct. Friday came and went without the investor meeting. Jake spent the weekend anxious and distracted, checking his phone constantly for updates from work, from Fiona, from anyone who could explain why his perfect career trajectory had suddenly stalled. Monday morning brought clarity. Jake left for work early, and I knew he'd return with news. I spent the day at Morrison & Associates, handling legitimate client business, waiting for the final piece of my plan to fall into place. He came home that evening looking like he'd aged 5 years in one day. "Fiona resigned," he said without preamble. "Effective immediately." I looked up from my laptop with appropriate surprise. "Resigned? Why?" Personal reasons, Jake said, but I could see in his eyes that there was more to it. And the investors, they're pulling out, something about concerns over company culture and management practices. Oh no, I said, closing my laptop and giving him my full attention. Jake, that's terrible. What does this mean for your job? He rubbed his face with both hands. I don't know. The funding was crucial for our expansion plans. Without it, he didn't need to finish. Maplewood would survive, but their growth trajectory was over. No expansion, no new hires, no promotions for existing employees. Jake's career advancement had just hit a brick wall. But that wasn't the end of it. Over the next week, more pieces fell into place. Fiona's husband filed for divorce, citing infidelity and requesting financial disclosure of all her recent activities. Maplewood's board, spooked by the investor withdrawal and employee conduct investigation, implemented strict new policies about workplace relationships and business travel. Jake found himself under subtle but constant scrutiny, not just from HR, but from colleagues who'd heard whispers about why their major funding opportunity had evaporated. His reputation as the promising young developer who might lead Maplewood's expansion had been replaced by questions about his judgment and professionalism. But I still wasn't finished. 3 weeks after Fiona's resignation, I came home with news of my own. Morrison offered me a promotion, I told Jake over dinner. Senior partner track. It would mean more travel, bigger clients, significant salary increase. Jake tried to look happy for me, but I could see the stress in his eyes. His career was stagnating while mine was taking off, and he didn't understand why. Hey fam, tell me something. What's more painful than your spouse cheating on you? I need to know. And what's sweeter than seeing them fall? Tell me in the comments. Now, let's move on. That's amazing, he said, forcing enthusiasm. You deserve it. There's one thing, though, I continued. The position would require relocating to our Los Angeles office. It's an incredible opportunity, but it would mean leaving Chicago. Jake's fork stopped halfway to his mouth. Leaving Chicago? I know it's a lot to consider, I said, especially with the wedding planning and everything, but this is the kind of opportunity that only comes once. He was quiet for a long moment, and I could practically see the wheels turning in his head. His career in Chicago was effectively over. His affair had imploded, his comfortable future had evaporated. Would, he started, then stopped. Would you want me to come with you? I met his eyes across our dinner table. This man who'd betrayed me while thinking I was too naive to notice, who'd planned to leave me while letting me plan our wedding, who'd mocked my trust while using it to deceive me. I don't think that would work, I said gently. This position requires someone who can travel extensively, work with high-profile clients, handle sensitive information. I need a partner who can support that level of commitment and responsibility. The implication was clear. Jake wasn't that partner. Sarah, he said, his voice cracking slightly, is this about us? About our relationship? I smiled sadly. This is about my career, Jake. About taking opportunities when they're offered. About not letting other people's choices limit my potential. He stared at me, and for the first time, I saw recognition in his eyes. Not full understanding, he wasn't that self-aware, but awareness that something fundamental had shifted. I thought, he began, then stopped. You thought what? I asked gently. I thought we were building something together. So did I replied truthfully. But sometimes people change. Sometimes they want different things. Sometimes they make choices that change everything. I stood up, clearing my plate. I'm accepting the position, Jake. I leave for LA in 2 weeks. That night, Jake tried everything. Tears, promises, begging me to reconsider. He talked about our history, our plans, our future together. He never once mentioned Fiona, never confessed to his affair, never acknowledged what had really destroyed our relationship. Even in his desperation, he couldn't be honest with me. I moved to Los Angeles 2 weeks later. Jake helped me pack, still hoping I'd change my mind, still believing this was about career ambition rather than consequences for his betrayal. The morning I left, he gave me one last desperate plea. "Sarah, please, we can make this work. Long distance, visits, whatever it takes. I love you." I looked at him, standing in the doorway of what had been our apartment. This man who'd shared my bed while planning his escape, who'd let me plan our wedding while texting another woman about their future together. "I know you do," I said softly, "but love isn't enough when there's no trust." Something flickered in his eyes. Fear, maybe, or the beginning of understanding. "What do you mean?" he asked. I smiled. The same gentle smile I'd been giving him for weeks while systematically dismantling his life. "I mean that some mistakes can't be undone, Jake. Some choices have permanent consequences." I got in my car and drove away, leaving him standing there with the growing realization that he'd lost everything and didn't even understand how. 6 months later, I was thriving in Los Angeles. The promotion had been everything I'd hoped for. Challenging work, incredible clients, a salary that let me live exactly the life I wanted. I'd bought a house in the hills with a view of the ocean, started dating a film producer who thought I was brilliant and told me so regularly. Jake, according to mutual friends, was still in Chicago, still at Maplewood, still dealing with the professional fallout from Fiona's resignation and the failed investor deal. His career had flatlined, his engagement was over, and he'd spent months trying to figure out what had gone wrong. Fiona had moved back to her hometown after her divorce, her tech career effectively over, thanks to the HR investigation and professional references that raised more questions than they answered. Her ex-husband had been generous in the settlement, but she'd lost the comfortable lifestyle she'd taken for granted. And me? I was exactly where I belonged, successful, respected, surrounded by people who valued my intelligence and capabilities. I'd learned the most important lesson of my life: never underestimate someone just because they love you. Jake had thought my trust made me weak, my love made me naive, my loyalty made me controllable. He'd been wrong about all of it. The last I heard, Jake was dating someone new, a sweet girl from his yoga class who reminded me of myself at 22. Trusting, optimistic, completely convinced that her love could change a man who's already shown her exactly who he was. I almost felt sorry for her. Almost. But mostly, I felt grateful. Grateful that Jake's betrayal had taught me my own strength. Grateful that his lies had revealed my own capabilities. Grateful that his departure had made room for something infinitely better. Sometimes, the worst thing that happens to you is actually the best thing that could have happened. You just have to be smart enough to see the opportunity hidden in the devastation. And as it turned out, I was much, much smarter than anyone had given me credit for. If you loved and enjoyed this story, do not forget to hit that subscribe button, like, and share. Until our next update, take care.